Vorthax the Ashen stood at the mouth of his cave and watched the world die. The blight had come to the eastern valleys now, turning the green forests into fields of gray dust. Where trees once reached toward the sky, only twisted stumps remained. Where rivers once flowed clear and cold, thick black mud crawled slowly toward the sea. He was the last of the dragons. This was not a title he had wanted. Once, his kind had numbered in the thousands. They had ruled the skies for 10,000 years, their fire lighting the darkness, their wings casting shadows over mountains. Now there was only him, and even he was fading. The dragon stretched his wings and felt the ache in his bones. His scales, once bright as polished obsidian, had grown dull and cracked. His flame, which had once melted castle walls, now flickered weakly in his chest. The magic that had sustained his kind for millennia was bleeding out of the world, and without it, dragons could not survive. He had watched his brothers and sisters fall one by one. Korith the Golden had been the first, her great body crashing into the sea when her wings simply stopped working. Malachar the Storm had followed, his lightning breath fading to nothing before the blight took him in his sleep. Vorthax had burned their bodies himself, as was the old way, though each funeral pyre had cost him more strength than the last. The elves had retreated to their forest sanctuaries, weaving spells of protection around their ancient trees. The dwarves had sealed their mountain gates, trusting in their runes to keep the corruption at bay. But Vorthax had seen the truth. The blight did not attack magic. It consumed magic. Every spell cast against it only made it stronger. Every enchantment used to fight it became food for its endless hunger. He was thinking about this when he smelled them. Humans, dozens of them, climbing the narrow path that led to his mountain. Vorthax felt his flame stir weakly in his chest. In the old days, he would have burned them without a second thought. Humans were food or entertainment or occasionally useful servants. They were not worth the attention of a dragon. But these were not the old days. And Vorthax was curious despite himself. He waited until they reached the broad ledge below his cave, then showed himself. Even diminished, even dying, he was still a dragon. His body was longer than 10 horses standing nose to tail. His teeth were like swords. His eyes burned with ancient fire. The humans did not run. They should have run. Every creature with sense ran from a dragon. But these humans simply stopped and looked up at him. They were thin and tired and covered in dust. They carried bundles on their backs and tools in their hands. Many of them wore strange masks made of thick cloth over their mouths and noses. One of them stepped forward. A woman, young by human standards, with dark hair cut short and practical. She bowed her head in a gesture of respect that surprised him. "Great One," she said, "we have come far. We ask only for shelter. The blight has taken our lands." Vorthax felt the fire rise in his throat. "And why should I care about the troubles of mayflies? You live and die in the blink of a dragon's eye. Your suffering means nothing to me." The woman did not flinch. "Because we crossed the blighted waste to reach you, and we are still alive." This gave Vorthax pause. The blighted wastes were what remained of the Great Plains to the east. 3 of his siblings had tried to fly over those lands. None had returned. The corruption there was so thick that it pulled the magic from any living thing that entered. "Impossible," he said. "Nothing survives the wastes." The woman pulled down her cloth mask and smiled. It was a tired smile, but there was something in it that Vorthax had not seen in a long time. It was not hope exactly. It was something harder than hope. Something more stubborn. "Dragons could not survive it," she said. "Elves could not survive it. But we are not dragons or elves. We are humans. We have no magic for the blight to take. We have only ourselves." She gestured to her people. "We learned to filter the poison from the air with these masks. We found water deep underground where the corruption had not reached. We mapped safe paths through observation and patience. We lost many, but we learned from each death. And we kept walking. Vorthax stared at her. In all his thousands of years, he had never truly looked at humans. They had always seemed so weak, so brief, so unimportant. They built their little villages and fought their little wars and died before a dragon could bother to remember their names. But now, looking at this woman and her people, he saw something different. They were weak, yes. They were brief, yes. They had no magic, no special powers, nothing that should have let them survive what had killed the mightiest beings in the world. And yet here they stood. "What is your name?" Vorthax asked. He had never asked a human their name before. "Sira," the woman said. "I was a farmer's daughter before the blight came." A farmer's daughter. Vorthax felt something strange in his ancient chest. It took him a moment to recognize it as curiosity. "Tell me, Sira the farmer's daughter, how did you survive what my kind could not?" Sira looked up at him with those stubborn eyes. "We had no choice," she said simply. "We could not fly away. We could not hide behind magic. We could only adapt or die. So we adapted." Vorthax was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, he stepped aside from the mouth of his cave. "You may stay," he said. "For now." As the humans filed past him into the shelter of his mountain, Vorthax watched them with new eyes. They were still mayflies. They would still live and die in the blink of his eye. But perhaps, he thought, there was something to be learned from creatures who had never had power. Perhaps survival was not about strength at all. Perhaps it was about something else entirely. The weeks passed, and Vorthax watched the humans make themselves at home on his mountain. They did not behave like any creatures he had known before. The elves would have sung songs of sorrow and waited for their doom with grace. The dwarves would have built fortifications and prepared for a final glorious stand. But the humans did neither. They worked. From the moment the sun rose until it set, they were busy. They cleared stones from a flat area near his cave and built rough shelters from wood and hide. They dug channels to catch rainwater. They explored the mountain slopes, marking plants that could be eaten and avoiding those that could not. Everything they did was practical and purposeful. Sira was their leader, though she never called herself that. She simply made decisions and others followed. Vorthax found himself watching her more than any of the others. She was always moving, always thinking, always solving the next problem before it became a crisis. One morning, he found her on a rocky ledge, examining a dead bird through a strange device made of curved glass. The bird's feathers had turned gray and brittle, the mark of the blight. "What are you doing?" he asked. Sira did not look up. "Learning," she said. "If I understand how the blight kills, perhaps I can find a way to stop it. Magic cannot stop it. I have seen the greatest sorcerers in the world try. I am not using magic." She turned one of the glass lenses, bringing the bird's feathers into sharper focus. "I am using my eyes and my mind. The blight leaves patterns in what it kills. Those patterns tell a story." Vorthax lowered his great head to look more closely. "And what story do they tell?" "The blight does not destroy," Sira said slowly. "It consumes. Look here." She pointed to the bird's chest. "The heart is untouched. The muscles, the bones, all normal. But every part of this creature that held magic is gone, burned away from the inside. Birds have magic? Everything has magic. Or had it." Sira finally looked up at him. "Plants use magic to grow. Animals use magic to heal. Even the smallest creatures have a spark of the arcane in them. The blight feeds on that spark. It eats magic the way fire eats wood. Then nothing can survive it. No, something can." Sira smiled that stubborn smile he had come to recognize. "We can. Humans have so little magic in us that the blight finds us barely worth the effort. We are like wet wood to its fire. We do not burn well. Vorthax considered this. In all his years, he had thought of humans as lesser beings because they lacked magic. Now he began to see that what he had called weakness might be something else entirely. The blight continued to spread. From his mountain, Vorthax could see it creeping across the land like a slow gray tide. The forests fell. The rivers turned to poison. Even the clouds seemed darker, as if the sky itself was sick. Word came from the elven sanctuaries. They had held for a time behind their walls of woven spells, but the barriers had fallen at last. The blight had fed on their magic until there was nothing left. The immortal elves, who had walked the world since before the first dragon took flight, were gone. The dwarven kingdoms sent no word at all. Their gates remained sealed, but no light shone from their windows, and no smoke rose from their forges. The runes that had protected them for ages had failed. "We are alone," Vorthax said one evening, watching the last light fade over a corrupted world. "We are not alone," Sarah said. She stood beside him on the ledge, small and fragile and somehow not afraid. "We have each other." "That is not what I meant." "I know what you meant." She turned to look at him directly. "You meant that the great powers of the world are gone. The dragons, the elves, the dwarves. All the races of magic and might. But Vorthax, those races tried to fight the blight with the same power that made them great. They tried to burn it with fire and freeze it with ice and bind it with spells. And every time they fought it, they fed it. Then how do you fight something you cannot fight?" Sarah was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You do not fight it. You outlast it. Fire burns hot, but it burns out. The blight is the same. It consumes magic, but magic is not endless. When there is no more magic left to eat, the blight will starve. And what then? A world without magic is a world without wonder. Without beauty. Without dragons. Perhaps." Sarah's voice was soft but steady. "Or perhaps a world without magic is simply a different world. Not worse. Just different. A world where people survive not because of what power they have, but because of what they do with their hands and their minds and their hearts." Vorthax felt his flame flicker in his chest. It was weaker now than it had been even a month ago. Soon it would go out entirely, and he would join his brothers and sisters in whatever darkness waited for dead dragons. "I will not see this new world," he said. "No," Sarah agreed. "But we will. And we will remember you. We will remember all of you. Why would you remember creatures who thought of you as nothing more than food and servants?" Sarah smiled. "Because you were magnificent. Because you flew through the sky like living fire. Because for 10,000 years, you were the lords of this world. That is worth remembering, even if we never liked you very much." Despite everything, Vorthax found himself making a sound he had not made in centuries. It was a low rumble deep in his chest. It took him a moment to recognize it. He was laughing. "You are a strange creature, Sarah the farmer's daughter." "I am a human," she said. "We are all strange. It is perhaps our greatest strength." Below them, the human camp was alive with activity. People were building, planting, planning. They were preparing not for a final stand, but for a future. A future without magic, without dragons, without any of the powers that had shaped the world for millennia. A future that would belong to them alone. Vorthax knew he was dying. The knowledge did not frighten him. Dragons did not fear death the way other creatures did. They had lived too long and seen too much to be surprised by the end when it came. But he had thought he would die in battle, or in some great final blaze of glory. He had not thought he would fade away slowly on a mountainside, surrounded by humans. His flame was nearly gone now. Where once he could have melted stone with a single breath, he could barely warm himself against the mountain cold. His wings had grown too weak to lift him. His scales fell away in patches, leaving gray skin beneath. He was becoming less a dragon with each passing day. The humans treated him with a kindness he had never expected. They brought him food, though he could barely eat. They sat with him in the evenings and told him stories of their travels. They asked him questions about the old world, about the places and peoples he had known in his long life. Sarah came to see him every day. She would sit beside his great head and talk to him about her work, her discoveries, her plans for the future. She never spoke of his dying, but he knew she understood. "The blight is slowing," she told him one morning. "We've been watching it from the high peaks. It used to advance a mile each day. Now it barely moves at all. It is running out of food," Vorthax said. His voice was weaker than it had been. "Just as you predicted." "Yes." Sarah paused. "Vorthax, I want to ask you something. We are building something here. A settlement, a community, a place where humans can survive and grow. But we know so little. We are farmers and craftsmen and hunters. We do not have the knowledge of the old world. What are you asking? You have lived for 10,000 years. You have seen empires rise and fall. You know the geography of this world, the history, the patterns of the land and the seasons. You know things that would take us generations to learn on our own." She met his eyes. "I am asking if you will teach us. Before you go." Vorthax was silent for a long moment. Teach humans. The very idea would have seemed absurd to him once. Dragons did not teach. Dragons did not share their knowledge with lesser beings. The secrets of the world were theirs to keep. But what good were secrets in a world where all the secret keepers were dead? "I do not know how to teach," he said finally. "I have never done it before." "Then we will learn together," Sarah said. "I will write down what you tell me. Everything you remember. Every story, every fact, every piece of wisdom. And we will keep it safe and pass it on to our children and their children after them. Your knowledge will not die with you. Why would you want the knowledge of dragons? We considered you beneath us. We hunted you for sport. We burned your villages when we were bored." "Yes," Sarah said simply. "You did. But that does not make your knowledge less valuable. The things you know could help us survive, could help us build a better world than the one that came before." She paused. "Besides, I have learned something in my years. Holding on to anger takes energy. We do not have energy to waste." Vorthax considered her words. He thought about all the things he knew, all the memories stored in his ancient mind. The locations of underground rivers and fertile valleys. The patterns of weather and seasons. The histories of kingdoms long fallen. The secrets of the mountains and the seas. All of it would be lost when he died, unless he gave it away. "Very well," he said. "I will teach you what I know. But I have one condition. Name it. Do not remember us as gods. Do not build temples to dragons or pray for our return. Remember us as we were. Proud and terrible and magnificent, yes, but also cruel and arrogant and blind. Remember that we thought ourselves lords of the world, and the world proved us wrong." Sarah nodded slowly. "I can promise that." And so, in his final weeks, Vorthax the Ashen did something no dragon had ever done. He taught. Sarah sat beside him every day with sheets of rough paper and a pot of ink made from crushed berries. She wrote down everything he told her in a small, neat hand. She asked questions when she did not understand. She drew maps based on his descriptions. She recorded histories and legends and practical knowledge alike. Other humans came to listen too. Children sat in wide-eyed wonder as the last dragon told stories of the old world. Hunters memorized the patterns of the land. Farmers learned which valleys would be safe to plant when the blight finally passed. Builders heard about the techniques of the dwarves, simplified into forms humans could use with their limited strength. Vorthax found that he enjoyed teaching. It surprised him. He had always thought of knowledge as a treasure to be hoarded, but sharing it brought a different kind of satisfaction. When a young boy understood something new, his face would light up with joy. When a woman realized how some piece of dragon lore could help her people, she would smile with gratitude. These small moments meant more to Vorthax than all the gold he had ever collected. "I begin to understand why you persist," he told Sira one evening. "You were right. There is something to be learned from creatures who have never had power. And what is that? That power is not the point." He shifted his great body, trying to find a comfortable position on the cold stone. "We dragons spend our lives gathering power, hoarding gold, collecting magic, conquering territory. We thought these things would make us immortal, but they only made us targets for the blight. And us? You gathered each other. You built families and communities. You learned to work together, to share what you have, to lift each other up when you fall." He let out a long breath. "We never understood that. We were too proud to understand." Sira was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The blight has stopped moving. I went to look this morning. It just sits there, like a gray sea frozen in place." "It is starving," Vorthax said. "Soon it will begin to fade." "How long?" "Years, perhaps, decades, but it will pass. And when it does, you will inherit whatever is left. Will you see it? The ending of the blight?" Vorthax closed his eyes. He could feel his flame guttering like a candle in a strong wind. It would not last much longer. "No," he said, "but you will, and that is enough." Sira reached out and placed her small human hand on his great scaled cheek. It was a gesture of comfort, of connection. Vorthax had never been touched gently by a human before. He found that he did not mind it. "Thank you," she said. "For everything." "Thank you," he replied, "for showing me what survival truly means." 50 years had passed since the death of the last dragon. Sira stood at the base of the mountain, her granddaughter's hand in hers. Her hair had gone white, and her face was lined with the marks of a long life. But her eyes were still sharp, still filled with that stubborn determination that had carried her through the blighted wastes so many years ago. "This is the place," she said. "This is where he lived." The girl looked up at the mountain with wide eyes. Her name was Mira, and she was 8 years old. She had grown up on stories of the dragon, but she had never seen this place. "It is so big," Myra said. "He was very big," Sira agreed. "The biggest creature I ever saw. When he spread his wings, they blocked out the sun. They climbed the path together, grandmother and granddaughter, moving slowly over the rocks and roots. The world around them was green again. Trees grew on the slopes, and birds sang in the branches. The blight had faded years ago, leaving behind soil that was richer than before. Life had returned to the world in ways no one had expected. Near the top of the path, they came to a small stone building. It had been built into the side of the mountain, sheltered from wind and rain. This was the shrine, the place where the humans kept their memory of the last dragon. Inside, the walls were lined with shelves. The shelves were filled with books, hundreds of them, all written in the same small, neat hand. These were the records Sarah had made in those final weeks, copying down everything Vorthax had told her. Maps and histories and practical knowledge. Stories and legends and wisdom. The accumulated memory of 10,000 years, preserved in simple ink on simple paper. In the center of the room, on a raised platform, sat a single object. It was a scale, black as night, larger than a dinner plate. The last scale that had fallen from Vorthax's body before he died. "Can I touch it?" Mira asked. "Yes, but be gentle." The girl reached out and placed her small hand on the scale. It was cool and smooth, harder than any stone. "Tell me again," Myra said. "Tell me about the dragon." Sierra smiled. She had told this story many times, to her children and her grandchildren, and to the young people of the settlement. She would tell it many more times before she died. It was a story that needed to be told. "His name was Vorthax the Ashen," she began. "He was the last of his kind. When I first met him, he wanted to burn us all. Dragons were like that. They saw humans as nothing more than food and servants. We were beneath their notice, but you changed his mind. I do not know if I changed his mind. I think the world changed his mind. He watched everything he knew die. The elves with their magic, the dwarves with their runes, his brothers and sisters with their fire. They all fell to the blight. But we remained. We had no magic to lose, so we lost nothing. We just kept going, step after step, day after day. Why did the magic creatures die, and we did not?" Sierra considered the question. Even after 50 years, she was not sure she understood the full answer. "The powerful ones tried to fight the blight with power," she said finally. "They used fire and ice and spells and runes. But the blight ate power. Every weapon they used against it only made it stronger. We had no weapons. We could not fight. We could only adapt and endure." "So being weak was actually strong?" "In a way. Though I would not call it weakness. I would call it something else. Persistence. Stubbornness. The will to keep going when everything seems hopeless." Sierra squeezed her granddaughter's hand. "Humans have always had that. It is perhaps our greatest gift." They left the shrine and walked out onto the ledge where Vorthax had spent his final days. The view stretched out before them, miles and miles of green and growing land. In the distance, they could see the settlement, much larger now than it had been. Thousands of people lived there, in houses of wood and stone, farming the rich earth and building a new civilization. "The world is so beautiful," Myra said. "It is. More beautiful than it was in the old days, I think. The magic is gone, but the land is alive. It heals itself now, without needing spells to help it along." "Do you miss the magic?" Sierra thought about this. She remembered the stories Vorthax had told her, of dragons flying through the sky like living fire, of elven cities that glowed with silver light, of dwarven forges that burned with runes of power. It had been a world of wonders. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but I think we have made our own kind of magic. Not the kind that comes from spells and enchantments. The kind that comes from working together, from building something out of nothing, from loving each other through hard times and good. Is that really magic? I think it is the only magic that matters." They stood in silence for a while, watching the sun move across the sky. Then Mira asked another question, the question that all children eventually asked. "Grandmother, why did the dragon help us?" "He did not have to. He could have just let himself die alone." Sierra smiled. This was the heart of the story, the part she never grew tired of telling. Because in the end, he understood something important. He understood that survival is not about being the strongest or the most powerful. It is about holding on to each other, about sharing what we know, about making sure that something of us continues after we are gone. So he shared his memories with us. Yes, everything he knew. 10,000 years of knowledge, given to a farmer's daughter with a pot of ink and a stack of paper. It was his gift to the future. To you. Myra looked back at the shrine, at the shelves full of books and the black scale gleaming in the dim light. "I want to read them all," she said. "Every book. I want to know everything the dragon knew. Then you will. And someday you will tell these stories to your own grandchildren, and they will tell them to theirs. That is how we keep the dead alive, Mira. Through memory. Through stories. through the simple act of not forgetting. They made their way back down the mountain as the sun began to set. Behind them, the shrine stood quiet and patient, holding its treasures safe. Below them, the human settlement glowed with the light of 1,000 fires, each one tended by hands that had never known magic but had never needed it. The dragons were gone. The elves were gone. The dwarves were gone. All the great powers of the old world had fallen to the blight, consumed by the very magic that had made them mighty. But the humans remained. They had survived what dragons could not. And they would continue to survive, not because they were strong, but because they were stubborn and kind and unwilling to give up on each other. That, in the end, was enough. That had always been enough.